These days, Australia is sadly no stranger to gun violence. But back in 1987, the idea of a gunman on the loose targeting random passers-by with a military assault weapon was unthinkable. In just 40 minutes of carnage, a city would lose its innocence.
This is Melbourne, a peaceful town, peaceful city, and all of a sudden, bullets are whizzing past.
A rampaging gunman would take the lives of 7 innocent people and leave dozens more wounded.
What's going on here? This is not Melbourne. This was a war zone.
In a unique insight, the gunman would live to describe his actions in chilling detail.
I shot him about here and he swerved over to where he is now, and the bike dropped and he started screaming out, so I let another 2 rounds into him.
We had the opportunity to interview a mass murderer. He wanted to tell his story, so we tried to find out as much as we could about him and about why he did what he did.
The Hoddle Street Massacre was a crime that shook Australia. This street in Clifton Hill, less than 5 kilometres from the heart of Melbourne, couldn't be more ordinary. Yet on the evening of the 9th of August 1987, a crime would unfold here that would mean its name would be forever remembered. This is Hoddle Street, and on that night, it resembled a war zone.
Hoddle Street in Clifton Hill is a major road in Melbourne. It basically connects the north and the south parts, and thousands of cars go past there every day of the week. There are train lines that go down virtually following Hoddle Street, and they carry thousands of people every day.
Crime-wise, look, like a lot of the inner city suburbs, Clifton Hill had more than their share of house breakings, burglaries, that sort of thing. But it was a pretty good suburb and still is.
It's only a short distance from the inner city area. Certainly Clifton Hill was never noted for a high crime, from my memory of the area. More of a sleepy hollow than anything.
On the evening of the 9th of August 1987, that tranquility would be shattered by an act of unspeakable and unfathomable violence. Chef Andrew Hack was heading out for an evening shift at the restaurant where he worked.
I was driving down Heidelberg Road, heading towards Clifton Hill, towards the city, and got towards Clifton Hill Station, and I took a left turn down onto Hoddle Street. Normally I would go straight over the overpass there. As I was driving down the ramp, I remember seeing a police car further down the road with sort of flashing lights, not thinking anything of it, just driving along, and the music was, quite loud, listening to that.
Railway signalman Wayne Monaghan was also preparing for a long evening shift in the signal box that was located next to Clifton Hill railway station.
Before I got to work, I got Kentucky Fried Chicken, and there was no microwaves in those days, or cookers or anything like that. So put the Kentucky Fried Chicken under the food warmer, then heard noises, gunshots, went back in the signal box. I rang the signalman at A box, he wouldn't answer the phone. I rang Metrol, which was the train control centre. They didn't know what was going on, I just said, I'm getting out of here.
Wayne left his signal box situated next to Hoddle Street and the unfolding chaos. He took cover nearby and waited for the police to arrive.
I remember seeing a car with sparks. Something had fallen off the car, looked like something had fell off from underneath the car onto the road. And I didn't think anything of that. Just kept driving. And I flattened out on Hoddle Street there, and then I just heard this almighty bang. And I remember looking at myself and my shirt, and there was blood all over my shirt. My body was numb, pins and needles feeling.
Andrew Hack had unwittingly driven into what was to become one of Australia's most shocking crimes. It was just after 9:30 p.m, and someone was firing randomly at cars on Hoddle Street. By then, at least 2 people were already dead and countless wounded. 24-year-old Vesna Markovska had been shot multiple times when she got out of her car after it had been hit by one of the gunman's first shots. She was a broadcaster and theatre performer. She had spent that weekend celebrating her father's birthday. Moments later, 27-year-old Englishman Robert Mitchell was shot in the head as he tried to help Vesna. He had only moved to Australia the previous year and worked as the state manager for a stationery company. Lying nearby, Gina Papagiannou was critically injured after being shot in the side. Gina was in her final year as an art student at Monash University and hoped to be a lawyer in the future.
I was down with one of my crew doing some work in St Kilda, and I heard some commotion on the radio in the police car. And Clifton Hill at that stage was probably 6 or 7 kilometres from our location. They knew, because of my call sign, that I'd held the rank of sergeant. They asked for me to attend at the scene at that time. The basic information was that there was a man randomly shooting at vehicles.
As drivers approached the gunman, hidden in undergrowth, they came under fire. In the chaos, many thought their cars had been hit by stones thrown up by other vehicles. They were tragically wrong. Over 100 rounds of ammunition would be fired at innocent people that night.
He was, to a certain extent, like the hunter with a spotlight on a rabbit. He just picked off whoever came in his sights. This is Melbourne, a peaceful town, peaceful city, and all of a sudden, bullets are whizzing past. These bullets in cars, and these cars reversing into other cars, and people under extreme shock.
As vehicles and passengers were hit, in a killing zone of less than 400 metres, several people were wounded by flying glass and shrapnel, but were able to drive to safety.
Started getting some feeling in my fingers and all that. And then I looked out the side, out of the car onto the footpath, and I noticed 2 people laying on the side of the road, not knowing what had happened. They were slumped over each other, and I opened my door and I thought I wanted to go and see what was wrong. And at this stage I still didn't know that I'd been shot. I walked to the front of my car, which is probably about 5 metres to the front of my car, and then I heard another noise, another bang. And it was quite loud, it was deafening. And then that's when I realised that someone was actually shooting. So I sort of panicked a bit, got back into my car, started to drive. I put my hand down to my side, and I remember putting my hand in a hole in the side of my back.
Despite life-threatening injuries, Andrew fled the scene and managed to get help at a nearby restaurant. Back on Hoddle Street, the gunman had claimed more lives. 53-year-old brewery worker Dusan Flajnik was killed as he drove into gunfire. His car was struck by 2 bullets, one of which lodged in his chest. He bled to death alone in his car, with his family learning of his death only after seeing television footage of the scene. Seconds later, John Muscat, a Clifton Hill local, left a friend's house nearby after hearing gunfire and going to investigate. He was shot multiple times as he crossed Hoddle Street, hit in the arms, chest and head. In the midst of the chaos, police officers were beginning to arrive.
A number of police cars stopped in and around Hoddle Street, around Ramsden Street where the railway station is. The only thing that was apparent was that someone was taking shots at vehicles or people, and no one knew where the location of that person was, how many people were involved, what the situation was. It was just, no one knew. There was no answer. You could hear the shots, you didn't know where they were coming from. You knew at that stage a number of people had already been shot. You could see some carnage on Hoddle Street.
We'd had a very quiet night up to that point, but there was a man with a gun in Hoddle Street shooting, and they wanted us to get overhead and see what we could do. So We responded as quickly as we could, got the aircraft out, started up and flew down over the area.
The police did not know how many people were there. The police did not know really where the shots were coming from. One moment they thought the shots were up near the signal box near Ramsden Street and Hoddle Street. The next minute the shots closer to the railway station. So there was a great deal of confusion, and the police that were there, generally speaking, had never confronted a scene like that in their working life.
What's going on here? This is not Melbourne. This was a war zone. This was something that, it was spooky. It was very spooky. The only noise you heard was the occasional wailing of a police siren or the shots being fired by this lunatic.
Tragically, a number of those shots were aimed at another car travelling on Hoddle Street that night. The Skinner family were returning from a birthday party when their car came under fire. 23-year-old mother Tracy was sitting in the passenger seat, holding her son on her lap, when their vehicle was hit by several bullets. As she placed her child in the relative safety of the footwell, she was shot in the head and died instantly. Incredibly, her husband drove the car to a nearby petrol station and safety. Their 18-month-old son survived. Moments later, 22-year-old postal worker Shane Stanton, riding his motorbike along Hoddle Street, was caught in a hail of gunfire. He was riding to work, but ironically was unaware he was on a rostered day off and not due in until the following night.
Well, I think my first recollection was actually seeing the motorbike laying on its side in the middle of Hoddle Street, and then a couple of cars parked at various spots on Hoddle Street. Now, what drew my attention as we were looking and listening to these shots going off, hearing all of the radio transmission, which was non-stop, the helicopter above. Up in the distance, I saw what I thought was someone certainly lying on the ground or in the gutter, waving an arm.
The figure desperately signalling to the police was Gina Papayannou. She'd been lying on the road in urgent need of medical attention for over 20 minutes.
There was a set of headlights on a motorcar that was stopped, so I could see the silhouette of this movement as a result of the headlights on that car. So I said, there's someone up there, and you could see them moving. So 4 of us jumped in the car. We didn't have bulletproof vests or anything in those days, so we drove up there with our heads under the dashboard. And for some reason, we just felt that the shots were coming from the railway station area. So we parked across the front of where this young female was lying to afford us a bit of protection, as well as her, who was conscious, and I've said this to a lot of people, her injuries were best described as being attacked by a shark. Virtually half the side of the body was just an open, massive wound. We had nothing that we could support her with as far as first aid. There was nothing we could do other than just, I guess, hold her hand and talk to her and comfort her.
As soon as it was deemed safe, paramedics rushed to Gina's aid.
There was one young girl there who had been shot but still alive, and so we treated her, and she was a lovely lady and was even considering the horrific things that had happened to her. We treated her, loaded her into the ambulance, and the police officer drove us to the hospital.
Gina's family maintained around-the-clock vigil for their daughter and sister, but despite doctors' best efforts, she would lose her fight for life in hospital 11 days later. She was only 21 and was mortally wounded trying to help others caught up in the massacre. Back on Hoddle Street, the random shooting continued. However, as more police officers arrived at the scene, it was apparent that they themselves had become the target. In August 1987, a gunman went on a violent rampage that left a trail of dead and wounded in his wake. As emergency services tried to deal with the situation, the net was already closing in on the perpetrator.
The shooting was still going on spasmodically. It wasn't every 1 or 2 minutes, it'd be periods of no gun sound at all. One stage, the helicopter got hit with one of the rounds.
I believe he fired 3 shots, but one hit the aircraft, and incredibly it was right below where I was sitting. The shockwave that went through my feet and my legs was unbelievable. The pain was incredible. If it had been sort of 0.5 millimetre forward, it would have actually split the fuel bladder and caused sparking with all the wires, so all the electrical stuff. So could have been interesting.
Narrowly avoiding a huge explosion, the crew managed to safely land the helicopter in a nearby field. Back on Hoddle Street, and as police began to take control of the scene, the shooting was growing more sporadic, and it was apparent the gunman was on the move.
He was able to observe from the bushes and the trees that were along the creek line, the Merry Creek, generally speaking where the police were, and any other obstacles. And he followed it, and he eventually came out into the street.
There was a police officer there directing traffic, shot at the police officer. Now that police officer was not injured because the bullet actually went through his jacket, burnt his shirt and put a mark on his skin.
One of the police who were on duty happened to see a figure dart in the distance. They chased after him, and the next moment they are under gunfire themselves.
He took refuge behind a brick wall and shot at the police officers in the police car. That's when he ran out of ammunition, and the police officers who were shot at called on him to drop his gun. He did that after he'd finished shooting and gave himself up.
The offender, who was behind a bluestone wall, if I remember correctly, threw his arms up in the air, screaming out, "Don't shoot, don't shoot," and the police then arrested him and handcuffed him.
This ignominious act brought to an end one of the most brutal crimes Australia had ever witnessed. Confronted with a normal suburban street that was now littered with bodies and abandoned vehicles, police had to determine who exactly this man was and why he would destroy so many innocent lives for no apparent reason. In a move that confounded detectives, the suspect now in custody was more than happy to talk.
We were told that at least one person had been shooting at cars in Hoddle Street, and that there were a number of people who were dead. We still didn't know for sure how many, and that there were many others injured. Beyond that, that was probably all we had.
The offender in question, currently sitting quietly in an interview room at St Kilda Road Police Station, was a 19-year-old disgraced Army officer cadet called Julian Knight. And what's more, he was willing to tell detectives exactly what he had done.
It was fascinating to interview in this circumstance where the person wanted to tell the story, couldn't wait to tell the story. It was sort of clinical, almost military, the way he was debriefing. And it felt like he was excited to tell the story. Look what I did. I did this, I did this, I did this. And it was sort of interesting and on reflection, a bit scary.
To the amazement of the police, during several interviews lasting almost 12 hours, Julian Knight took the detectives step by step through his nefarious actions that evening, and even explained his reasons for carrying out the attack.
We had the opportunity to interview a mass murderer. He wanted to tell his story, so we tried to find out as much as we could about him and about why he did what he did.
Just sights, target, bang.
Prior to the shooting, he had troubles with his Tirana motor car. He was having trouble changing gears. A former girlfriend was having a party, and he wasn't invited to the party, which upset him. He went to the local hotel nearby, and he had some beer there with one or two other people. And according to them, he didn't drink a great deal. He chatted up the barmaid and made reference to the fact that she had a scar on her face, and he commented that he's got lots of scars on his body, and then went back to his home.
He went to his bedroom, he retrieved his guns. He had 3 weapons, a .22 rifle, a shotgun and a high-powered military rifle. He pulled them out, he got his gun belts, his ammunition, loaded up magazines.
You could argue that the shotgun and the .22 could be used for hunting rabbits, foxes, but the M14, it's designed purely and simply for military purposes, to kill another human being.
He then stepped us through how he went out of his home, across the road, which is adjacent, parallel to the railway line, crossed the railway line onto a little reserve beside the railway track, and that abutted on Hoddle Street. A spot where you had a good view north and south of the traffic. It's quite a wide street, pretty well lit. He then told us how he started shooting at the people in the cars. So picking them off as they drove along with the intent to kill. I mean, we took him to that point in our questioning, why we were shooting at the cars or the people. He said he was shooting at the people. Why were you shooting at the people? I was shooting at them to kill them. Very clear about that.
By shooting at them, was it your intention to kill them?
Yeah.
The people in the car?
This chilling admission was just the first insight into the mind of Julian Knight.
He talked about the idea of wanting to know what it was like to shoot someone. I wanted to know what it was like to kill someone. I wanted to be involved in a theatre of war. I wanted to be involved in combat. These are things that he said. However, when the time came, when the police called on him, he actually did give up then.
Was it your intent to shoot the policemen, to kill them?
No.
What was your intent when you were firing at them?
No, I thought they'd shoot back. I wanted SAG to come because I didn't particularly want to, lie bleeding in the gutter with a 38 slug in my heart. Coughing blood. I preferred SAG to take my head right off.
There's nothing brave about the man at all, because he was shooting at people in their cars who were unarmed and didn't even know he was there. We saw nothing at all in his demeanour in terms of regret or remorse. Nothing. The nearest thing to that was when the newspapers arrived, and they were starting to put the stories very quickly into the newspapers, and we showed him a newspaper and he looked at it and he got angry because they had some of the facts wrong. But he said something like, "No, this is bullshit, they've got this all wrong." That said a fair bit that this was all about him. Immature, self-obsessed, by no means psychotic, not at all. He was very clear-eyed, very clear-minded, just a very nasty person.
As detectives pressed on, determined to find some reason for Julian Knight's abhorrent actions on Hoddle Street, the survivors' and witnesses' personal battles were only just beginning. Melbourne and the whole of Australia was stunned by the massacre on Hoddle Street on the 9th of August 1987. As detectives tried to determine the reasons for the attack, survivors and emergency crews faced their own ordeal: how to cope with what they'd witnessed.
I was approached by various people in the community and their solicitors who wanted to refer survivors of Hoddle Street, that is people that had witnessed the shooting, people that had been shot and survived, for treatment. To a person, they were suffering elements of post-traumatic stress disorder. Some were experiencing major grief. They were depressed, they were having nightmares, generically, flashbacks. And of course, this was front-page news for a very long time, so it wouldn't go away in their consciousness because every day they'd read more about Knight and all the rest of it.
Unfortunately for some, the awful events that they had experienced and the way they were treated in the immediate aftermath would have lasting effects.
They took me down to Fitzroy North Police Station and done a statement there, and they let us go. We had no way of getting back because I asked the policeman, how are we going to get back to our cars? and they brought us back in a divvy van and dropped us off on the other side of where Knight shot everyone, and we had to walk past the whole lot, all the bodies, the whole lot, with another policeman. So you could still see all the people in the cars and lying on the ground and all that.
I was a young fella, 19 years old. To be honest with you, a little bit of, once I got better, a little bit of media attention, I sort of enjoyed it. I thought, you know, but deep down inside, I was suffering. I just hated myself and just, I didn't want to go on.
I did take up drinking very seriously because I didn't worry about life anymore, didn't worry about dying anymore.
As well as the civilians caught up in the tragedy, first responders too were severely affected.
At that stage, there was never any real emphasis on either psychological or operational debriefing. And so, as it turned out, because there was a need for work to be done afterwards, we probably had about 20 minutes to clean up and sort of get ourselves together a little bit at the hospital, and then we got a call to go to an asthmatic patient, 5 minutes away.
It was something that the police here hadn't experienced, to my knowledge, before August 1987. The tactics and the response teams that the police now have, compared to 20 odd years ago, have changed dramatically. So I think they'd be certainly more prepared or well prepared. But how do you prepare for a lunatic who walks out on the street with a gun and starts shooting blatantly at anything that moves? I don't know.
The first step in answering that question was to explore the background of Julian Knight, to try and piece together the events in his life that led directly to the massacre on Hoddle Street.
He was an adopted child. His father was in the military. He was a captain. Linguistics, Chinese, I think, was his specialty. His mother was a delightful person. He was raised in a very loving environment. He attended a number of different high schools, and part of the reason for that was to find a school that had a cadet corps.
The young Julian Knight was obsessed with the military, and despite his father being against the idea, he successfully applied for a place at the Royal Military College at Duntroon, where he trained to be an army officer.
He was known as a person from the wrong side of the tracks, and so he would be referred to continuously in the pejorative, in a negative way, and he was bullied and bastardised. And as a disciplinary measure, he was confined to barracks on the weekend, and he saw this as another form of bullying. And there was a particular Saturday night that he went AWOL, absent without leave, and went to a local nightclub in Canberra known as The Bin, which I think still exists. And the person that he felt was bastardising him was there, and Knight stabbed him. Arising from that, and Knight was also injured in that incident, he was placed in hospital. His father then intervened as best he could, and Knight was discharged from the army, awaiting a court-martial. So he went straight from that military environment back to his home at Clifton Hill, where he felt doubly disenfranchised because a lot of his old friends rejected him. They had a view about him joining the army, and the fact that it hadn't worked for him just galvanised that view, I guess. And so he was really a very disenfranchised teenager, lonely and angry, and dealing with the loss of his life project, which was to be an officer and a gentleman.
So the point in saying that about his history is, in other words, talking about why he got booted out of the military, trouble with his girlfriend, trouble with his car, had had a few drinks. The point in talking about that is we wanted to cover off on those as not being the reasons that triggered a psychotic episode. And we were able to do that. And that was important, to be able to say, well, there's no psychosis here, there's no psychotic episode. He's not mad. So in lay terms, you might be describing him as crazy. In medico-legal terms, he was not. He was sane. He certainly had a personality disorder. He was sane.
I guess in common parlance, he's a person who is well-oriented in time, place and person. There's no madness there. And clearly, as the crime demonstrates, there was a lot of badness at the time.
Perpetrators of mass shootings rarely live to tell their version of events. After Hoddle Street, Knight was able to do just that, and detectives went one step further. They took him back to the scene, where, in graphic detail, the gunman relived the horror of that evening.
You had the 22 in my left hand and the shotgun in the right and the M14 slung over my shoulder by a sling.
In circumstances where someone is talking, if we can, we want to cover off on what we have to prove. So, for example, we want to be able to prove his intention while he was shooting at the people in the car. So, explicit questions about that. Okay, so when you were shooting, what were you shooting at?
I was shooting at the people in the car.
And what was your intention in relation to them?
Kill them.
Why did you want to kill them?
I don't know.
So proving his intent to kill is an important thing. So that was important for us to take him to those questions, and his answers were important so far as proving goes.
So I didn't see them get it out. I just saw her on the road, and that's when I shot her. And then she fell back on the road, and I let off another two, and then someone else came out, and I dropped that one as well.
Right. And when you fired at them, what was your intent?
Kill them.
Why did you want to kill them?
I don't know.
Can I say that was really chilling. At the time, for me personally, I was in work mode. When I look back on it, I think this is a remarkable piece of an interview. So he steps us through almost. So Brian McCarthy, my senior sergeant, took the lead in the investigations and asked him questions along the way. Essentially, though, he took us through another form of debrief at the scene. So he was able to show us where he was when he started, where he first started shooting, that person. In one example, he describes that he could hear the person screaming.
I shot him about here, and he swerved over to where he is now, and the bike dropped and he started screaming out, so I let another 2 rounds into him.
I think he used words like, I put him out of his misery, so I shot him again to kill him.
What was your intent when you shot him?
Kill him.
Do you know why you wanted to kill him?
No.
The confession is only a beginning to an investigation, and in this case, in one sense, the investigation started with the confession.
As the whole of Australia came to terms with the dreadful events on Hoddle Street, the public's thoughts turned to a trial. How would Julian Knight defend his actions in front of a jury and in the court of public opinion? In April 1988, the survivors and witnesses of the Hoddle Street Massacre braced themselves for their first sight of the perpetrator, as Julian Knight appeared for his committal hearing at Melbourne Magistrates Court.
We walked in, sat down, and I was maybe 2 metres, 3 metres away. He was sitting in a box, and it started. And the committal hearing, basically, the judge will read out how each person was killed. And I remember there was a young lady, Tracy Skinner, I think her name was, who was killed, and her partner was in front of me, and I remember him, when it was read out, he said, something to Knight. It was quite nasty, quite rude, which he probably deserved, but I remember Knight just turning around to him and just giving him a smirk, smirking at him as like, bad luck sort of thing or whatever. But that was pretty bad.
6 months later, survivors, witnesses and relatives of the deceased were spared the trauma of a trial when Knight pleaded guilty to 7 counts of murder and 46 counts of attempted murder.
Eventually, he agreed to, I guess we'd describe it as a plea bargain. And if he pleaded guilty, he would get a life sentence with a minimum of 27 years. And that would spare the community the trauma of a very protracted trial. It would spare the victims the trauma of having to relive the event in the witness box and be cross-examined about it.
There was a sense of relief when we learned about this, because if you think about how we might have had to run a trial and put all of those victims through a trial, families and the rest of it, that would have been horrendous. However, it was never really an option. He was pleading guilty from the start. He pleaded guilty to all the charges, and his plea, whilst it was put as well as it could have been by his counsel, was pretty lame. The prosecutor was able to paint the picture about what happened and talk about what might have been behind it in terms of saying there was no psychosis, there was no insanity. This was just a person with a bit of a personality disorder and a very immature man who chose to go out and kill people because he wanted to see what that was like.
In November 1988, Julian Knight was sentenced to a minimum of 27 years for the massacre on Hoddle Street. To many, his sentence was an insult.
The fact that after murdering 7 people, let alone the untold number of people that were injured physically or mentally, or both, that he could potentially be walking the streets of Melbourne again after 27 years was just a grave sentencing error.
It came over the news and the radio later that day and said that he'd been sentenced to life with a minimum parole period of 27 years, which back then I thought, life, you'll never get out, but I didn't know the parole sort of period. I think back then you had to give someone a parole period just to give them a bit of hope. But I remember my mum ringing me and telling me that, it's not enough, it's not enough. It should be life forever. And so that was tough. But 27 years, 28 years now is gone, and it's gone so quick. So now we hopefully we can just put it behind us and keep him in jails.
Further angering survivors and witnesses of the terrible events on Hoddle Street has been Knight's behaviour in prison.
I said to him when he was 19, pull your head in. You're a 19-year-old. If you don't create problems in the prison, there's a chance that you might get parole when you're 46. People may excuse you on the basis of your youth. But of course, Knight has remained in the public light since that time, for all the wrong reasons.
He should never be released. And the thing about what people don't realise, he's caused nothing but trouble the whole time he's been in jail. The self-appointed president of the prisoners' rights group, and he's been branded here as a pest to the court system.
That served as a constant reminder of the original atrocity that he committed, and consequently people, I think, now are angrier about him and what happened than in fact they were 27, 28 years ago, because it's been constantly reinforced that he's there and what he did and so on, and he hasn't knuckled under.
Always protesting about the rights of prisoners and the duties and his own innocence and all those sorts of things. So no, he deserves to stay until he can rot in hell, as far as I'm concerned.
I don't think he'll be released. I think the political climate has changed so dramatically since 1987. The antipathy towards him has intensified almost exponentially. Back then the city was in shock. We've had, all this time to process it, and he's been in the public eye intermittently over the past 3 decades or so.
A lot of the times it is focused on him. We need to focus a lot on the survivors and the victims and how they're coping, and we all hate it. We all hate seeing his name in the news. We need to just shut him up and just hopefully he can just never talk about it again.
In 2014, the law that refers to parole was changed, specifically relating to Julian Knight. The amendment meant he will be eligible for parole only if he is in imminent danger of dying or is seriously incapacitated, and as a result, no longer has the physical ability to harm any person.
I interviewed him in early 2015, and I was retained in past years to review him every 5 years for the parole board, but I had not seen him for quite a number of years. And for the first time ever, and I always question him about, are you sorry for this? Is there any remorse? And for the first time ever, he said he was very sorry for what he had done. I'm always sceptical about expressions of remorse. I've seen thousands of people, and I'm yet to meet somebody that doesn't express remorse. The difference is they normally express it at the moment they're caught. With this man, it's taken nearly 3 decades for him to actually say he was sorry for what happened. So I thought it was significant and in all likelihood genuine, as best I could tell. Certainly appropriate.
Despite this admission, Knight has never provided any explanation for his actions on Hoddle Street, other than his morbid desire to experience combat and killing.
I have a theory that it was really the confluence of anger, unrequited ambition, being bullied, alcohol, and access to firearms. And following Hoddle Street, I became quite vocal about the need for better arm control in this country, because I think it's arguable that had he not had access to those guns, Hoddle Street may never have happened.
We had this Hoddle Street shootings where 7 people were killed and many more injured. In Victoria, not far away, in fact in the city, we had the Queen Street shootings where quite a number of people were killed, followed later by Port Arthur. It is in another state. So for me, I've always had a profound dislike for firearms, and I see no reason at all for the legislation to provide access to high-powered military weapons for people here. I grew up in a rural area, and I absolutely understand the need for farmers to have a .22 rifle, maybe a shotgun to deal with vermin. The idea that people can have high-powered military weapons is just, for me, a complete nonsense.
Despite almost 3 decades having passed since that cold August night that claimed the lives of 7 people, the mental scars of the Hoddle Street Massacre still remain.
It has had a really profound effect on some people, and I understand that when you sort of read some of their stories. It really shocked Melbourne and brought into Melbourne some real horror, some real terror that this could happen.
And even to this day, it affects me. You know, it does, and I don't sort of talk to it much with my family because I don't want to upset them, even though they know what I've been through, and it's it's hard. So everyday, regular Australians going about their business, good people, all of them, and so some of them pulled up because they saw what was happening. They saw people injured, they got out to help, and they were shot. And I think every one of those is a tragedy. It changed my life. It did. You know, I didn't know whether I was going to die or, you know, I survived, and I'm lucky.